All right, today we're jumping into one of the most powerful foreign policies of the entire 20th century. We're talking about the U.S. strategy of containment, the idea that basically wrote the rule book for the Cold War. And that's a huge question, right? But believe it or not, for almost 50 years, the answer was basically one word: containment. Just think about that. This single idea drove everything the US did on the world stage. We're talking about everything from giant economic plans to, yeah, some really brutal wars. Okay, so before we get into the huge impact it had, let's break it down. We've got to start with the basics. What even was this policy of containment? At its heart, the idea was actually pretty simple. The goal wasn't to roll in and destroy communism where it already was. Nope. The whole point was just to stop it from spreading. It was literally about containing it, keeping it inside its existing borders, mainly the Soviet Union and its allies. It was like drawing a line in the sand and saying, all right, that's it. You go no further. And get this wasn't some quick, short-term plan. It kicked off right after World War II back in the late 40s, and it stayed the main game plan for decades. We're talking about a single policy that was used to justify the US jumping into two massive wars, Korea and then Vietnam. I mean, the staying power of this one idea is just incredible. So you have to ask why. Why did they stick to this policy so hard? What was the real engine behind it? Well, it really boils down to one simple, powerful thing: fear. And to really get that fear, you kind of have to put yourself in their shoes back then. First off, you've got this huge fear of the Soviets just expanding into a totally wrecked and vulnerable Europe. Then, and this was a big one, in 1949, China falls to communism, and that just sends these massive shockwaves across the West. It created this idea that communism was this single, giant, unstoppable force, just marching across the globe, ready to knock over countries from Asia all the way to Latin America. Okay, so having an idea is great, but how do you actually make it happen? How did the US put containment into action? Well, they built what you could call a containment toolkit, a whole set of strategies and alliances. It was really a three-part plan. First, on the political and military side, you had the Truman Doctrine. This basically said, hey, if you're a country fighting off a communist takeover, we'll send you aid. Then there was the economic part, the Marshall Plan. This was huge. It pumped billions of dollars into rebuilding Europe. The idea was, if economies are stable, communism looks a lot less appealing. And finally, the military muscle, NATO. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization was basically a giant defensive pact, a shield to warn the Soviets not to even think about attacking. So you see, three different tools, all for the same job: containment. So the whole thing started with a big focus on Europe, right? But its most brutal and bloody tests would happen thousands of miles away, over in Asia. Yeah, this is where the theory, the policy on paper, slammed right into the hard reality of war. That fear of communism spreading, it wasn't just an idea anymore. It became a reason to send in the troops. And what's really wild is how the logic was exactly the same for both wars. I mean, look at it. In Korea, the US jumps in to keep the communist North from taking over the South. Fast forward a couple of decades, and it's the exact same argument for Vietnam. To the folks in Washington, these weren't just local fights, no way. They saw them as absolutely critical battlegrounds in the worldwide war against communism. Eventually, of course, the Cold War did end. But the effects of this 50-year policy? Oh, they're still with us. The world we're living in right now was totally shaped by it. All right, so let's recap the big picture here. Containment started as a response to this intense fear of communism spreading everywhere. It was put into action using money, like the Marshall Plan, and military pacts, like NATO. But, and this is crucial, it came at a huge cost. It was the reason the US got involved in major wars in Korea and Vietnam, and it created alliances that, yeah, are still a major deal today. And that really leaves us with a big question to chew on, doesn't it? When you look at an alliance like NATO, which was built specifically to contain the Soviet Union, and you see it's still a massive player on the world stage today, it really makes you think, how are the echoes of these Cold War strategies still influencing our world? How do those old alliances affect global politics right now? That's definitely something to keep in mind.